recording today's meeting, so it'll be available for those that either miss it or want to go back and watch it. It'll be available for your viewing pleasure eventually on YouTube. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to do introductions to the chat box. So if I could just ask you to put, if you haven't yet, your name and affiliation or community you're from. And then just a reminder that I will be muting people if I pick up a bunch of background noise. You're coming into the meeting muted. Obviously, we want to make this interactive. So if you have a question or a comment or something like that, feel free to unmute and, you know, speak your mind. Definitely don't want to or expect you to stay muted the whole time, but just to limit background noise. If you're not speaking, if you could make sure you're muted. We do have a function if you go down to the bottom middle of your screen, there'll be a button called participants. You can bring up participants. And with that, then there's several interactions. So you have a yes and no, a raise hand. And as we're going to the roundtable, and we'll cover this again, we will be asking anybody that has updates to raise your hand, and then we'll just go through that list. And as we go through the meeting, if you have questions that come up and you don't want to interrupt, you can also use the chat function to ask questions. If you want to enable your video, I'd sure encourage you to do so to try to make this as personable as possible. I think that's all I have as far as Zoom orientation. So just a quick run through of our agenda this morning. Like I say, we'll be doing introductions through the chat box. And then I'm going to turn it over to Boone for an update. We are going to introduce you to new steering committee members that have been appointed here recently. That Alex Robertson's got a presentation from his tour of Australia. I think Brenda Hallmark's going to join him on that as well. And then we are going to try some roundtable updates. We have over 30 participants, so we'll see how that goes. But we want to be sure to hear from you. I know there's a lot of value in hearing what other folks have going on, especially during this kind of uncertain time that we have now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Boone.
Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. All right. So with COVID, we've had quite a few changes, as everybody knows, right? We've been Zoom meetings like crazy and canceling things left and right. So right off, our CWPPs have had some good slowdowns to them, if you will. But Lapine, you know, due to the COVID, we weren't able to get it in front of the city council, not yet anyway, but we've got a couple different plans that Ed and I have been talking over to be able to get it in front of them and then also in front of the Board of County Commissioners. It's been out for well over a month now for people to look at and review. It's on the web page. We've distributed it in various ways. But Lapine is coming along. It's ready to be signed. Sun River is the other one that's being updated this year. Kind of covered both these last meeting, but Sun River, we laid out a decently aggressive plan with getting it updated. And that was right at the time that COVID was kind of rolling out. But basically we were planning to make 2 meetings face-to-face to kind of get that stuff updated, but anyway, through that, when COVID rolled out, we transitioned over to Zoom, and actually it's been going pretty smoothly. We've been able to communicate through email quite a bit, and then our Zoom meetings, we've got a whole group that gets together to review the document, and we'll have a meeting this week. We'll be looking at the action items and the priorities, along with all the updates that we've already done as far as accomplishments and stuff over this last couple of years, or 5 years. So those 2 are moving along pretty good. Fire-wise, still working with communities, but I've got a couple that, you know, Bob's community is one of them, but we need to figure out a way to do our assessments. I'm hoping to talk offline with ODM about how we can still get out there, talk with the community, go through and do those assessments and communicate that stuff back. I think we have the tools to do it. We just have to get a little bit creative with it and make sure that we're conversing all the information we need to everybody. So FireWise is moving, but moving slow. Our FACnet, our Fire Adapted Communities Network. We did do our we did the Defensible Space Concepts class, and we did that virtually with Allison. Allison did a great job coordinating all that. We had really good turnout, similar to what we had at the class, but we shortened the day, did it a half day, and it was, in my mind, it was quite successful. It's interesting that we used a full day before, and then we did the half day, and it didn't really feel like we missed really any information. I think we just eliminated some of our side stories, which is value added, but still, we still got to the point with all of those. And then along with the virtual classes, we're looking at our FireWise community workshops. So we were talking about doing just a couple of in-person classes, and now we've transitioned to hoping to do like a 4-part series. And this week on Thursday is our first one. And I put that out earlier for people to RSVP to. We've got over 30 participants that are planning to attend. It's a partnership with myself, Ben Fire, Doug Green, who works Ben Fire and Sisters Fire, along with ODF, with Chase and Ed, who we're going to put on these series of classes. And these aren't really focused on defensible space per se, but it's more of the process of how you became FireWise, the hurdles that you've had, some of the tools that we use for outreach to those communities, and just kind of helping people along with moving through FireWise to make them realize all the things that they benefit from doing FireWise, but also things that they can expect as along the way, and all the successes from those other communities. And one person that I forgot to mention there was Jenna Trinidou. She's the statewide rep for FireWise. So she's also going to do a little talk about why FireWise is important to the statewide and kind of what her role is and how that rolls up and down from the communities all the way up to the national NFPA level. But we're hoping to do a 4-part series. So we'll see how that goes with this Thursday. The big item that everybody's been emailing and calling about, and we've been discussing for several weeks now, is our Fire Free event. So last week on Wednesday, the Board of County Commissioners met and to discuss whether, at that time, the way I saw it was we were kind of looking at 3 different options. We move forward with as is, we cancel it and figure out new dates, or the third option is we extend the dates to kind of decrease that big influx of people. And Solid Waste was talking about how, one of the things that was contributing to decisions there was, with everybody being home, there's a lot of work going on, lots of defensible space type of activities. People are removing vegetation, lemon stuff, already bringing other trash to the dump. And they were backing up all the way out on 27, and it sounded like also to the point of backing out onto 97 down at the Southwest transfer station. So things were already coming in, regardless of it being free or not. But anyway, that wrapped into our talk about what kind of dates to open it up to, and we landed on May 9th through the 24th. And that will be for all of the sites during the regular business hours. So not 24/7, but during the regular business hours of those sites. So not landfill. During that time period, I believe does go to a 7-day week. So it will be open during its regular business hours through that. The transfer sites, Negus, Fry-Rear, Southwest transfer site, those will all be open during their regular days. So there's a couple days a week that they're closed there, but free through that whole time. So before we were only doing the transfer sites on the weekends. So this will be 3 weekends plus the 2 weeks in between. So quite a few more days for people to bring stuff in. And then our west side location last year was the first time that it was used. And that's a site that's being provided by Brooks Resource, which is awesome, right out there by the tree farm. And then Ben Fire has been supplying the volunteers for that. And this year, talking to both entities there, Brooks Resource still going to provide the site, and then Ben Fire is still going to provide the volunteers. And that's because it's volunteers. We're looking at May 9th and 10th, the 16th, 17th, and the 23rd and 24th, just those weekends and not the days in between. And there's a few different reasons why to only do that. And I guess one piece to go back on is with all those sites, solid waste is planning to provide the folks to staff that. They're already open, already doing all of their social distancing, and they know what to do, but also they, that's just too much to be asking of volunteers to be out there that much, those many days. It'd be hard to round up folks for it. But that's not to say that we can't have volunteers for those sites. So as you see, the west side, we're going to be doing bin fire, but those other sites, if people are wanting to still volunteer, like, we're not going to turn you away. We just need to make sure that we're coordinating the days and the times. Southwest Transfer Station, one of those weekends, we've already got some people that want to volunteer for that, so we're coordinating those days as is. But this has always been a partnership, cooperation between all of us, putting together Fire Free, and it's really nice. It's a great opportunity to still get your name out there, say that you're participating with us, and provide a service to all of our communities. So if anybody's wanting to still volunteer, please contact me and I'll channel you through the right place to get signed up for volunteering. Otherwise, I think that's everything that I've got right now that I'm working on. Several things have been canceled that are kind of smaller, but trying to work around Zoom meetings and facilitating new kind of ways of doing things.
Boone, Commissioner DeBone here. I just wanted to touch base about Fire Free real quick.
Yep.
So it's 15 years and plus. I mean, maybe this is their 16th year, I think is the number. So this is kind of the culture of Central Oregon, being able to do those fire-free days, bring in a trailer load of yard waste and get it dropped off. So we should be celebrating that. This is Project Wildfire. So as a community outreach group, this is our job, is to kind of spin it up, make it positive, do it together. Supporting 3 weekends right now. It does cost money to have the staff there, the chipping when it's done, and these big piles are done. So it's just a big coordinated effort, real positive. And then also the media. I mean, the media is going to support us on this. People look forward to this at this time of year, and the media is there with us. So we're really going to kind of have some fun. One of my thoughts about that backing up situation is, please let folks know to, come early in the morning, possibly. We'll learn about when it really gets queued up, but prepare to kind of offset some times. And I don't know what the answer is yet, but we did see queuing at 27th and also often up into 97 in the South County for everybody calling about 2 in the afternoon or whatever it was. So we're going to learn about that, and maybe this would be a good group to be able to distribute through email once we see the peak times, what the low times are, so people can be optimal about getting to the transfer facilities. We've also had, Heart of Oregon Corps out there in the past. I'm not sure if they're going to be out there much or not, but this is social distancing, respecting our space, and being ready to drop that off and clear out of the area. So we're not crossing those paths. We're working in that environment also. But looking forward to it myself. I'll be dropping some stuff off.
Thank you, Tony, for that. And one thing to add to that, as I've been updating the web page and kind of putting things on hold, I put a note on there prior to the board meeting, just saying that we were reevaluating Fire Free, and you would not believe the phone calls that came in of people that really depend on that and count on it. Some were from community leaders that were saying, hey, we need to reorganize our contractors and figure out what's going on, so please keep us updated, all the way to people that sounded as if they had typed out their rants and were reading them to me word for word about how upset they were that we were not doing Fire Free. And it didn't say we weren't doing it, just so that we were reevaluating how we were going to do it. So I think there's a lot of people that are going to be pretty excited and really happy that we're still providing that service out there.
Looks like Ray's got his hand up with a question. Ray, go ahead.
Oh, morning. We're having a contractor come out, and with COVID, everybody's starting to participate. Is it possible for our contractor to come in on a different route? Because we pay them by time, and they're just going to go in there and do a dump real fast and come back out. Can we avoid the queue in some way?
As of now, I don't know anything, any way to.
We can talk offline, Ray, with solid waste, but we don't have anything set up like that right now.
Well, I mean, just a thought, there may be a great opportunity because, the drop off is at kind of the edge of the landfill. And then we also have Deschutes recycling yard. So maybe there's a way to do something like that, but that'd be a good conversation to have.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give Ed a call.
Yeah, I'll make a note, Ray. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Boone before we move on our agenda? Don't forget, if you're asking a question, you have to unmute. Okay, hearing none, seeing none in the chat, we're going to move on. We can always get questions at the roundtable as well if something comes up or wasn't clear. I'd also encourage you to just circle back with Boone if you have questions on any of his update there. Next up, we're going to ask that the new steering committee members that were just recently appointed, just give a brief introduction to the group. There's a couple that have attended multiple Project Wildfire meetings, and there's a couple that are brand new to this group or set in last time, but we didn't make time for introductions. So I'm just going to go down my list, and if you wouldn't mind just giving us just a 1 or 2 minute introduction to yourself, either who you're representing, where you're from, what community, your interest in a little bit of what got you interested in Project Wildfire. And I'm just going to go down my list here. Bob, Foley, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Ed. Can everybody hear me okay?
Ken.
All right, great. My name is Bob Poley, and I'm retired, but do a lot of volunteer work. Primarily my volunteer work this year centers around my HOA, Mountain High Homeowners Association. I'm the chairman of the Firewise committee for that association. And I also volunteer when it's open at the High Desert Museum. My volunteering started after my career. I had a long 25-year career in telecommunications, in sales management, marketing management, and management training for AT&T, Lucent Technologies, and Avaya Communications. So as AT&T split off these different business units, I followed my business, which was large telecommunication systems. I fully retired in 2009, but before that, I did a early retirement in 2001, and for those 8 years in between, I was the executive director of a large nationwide nonprofit community service group that was formerly sponsored by Lucent Technologies, but in 2001 they gave up sponsorship, and my group of 120,000 members had to go out and find our own funding, which we did quite successfully. So I did fully retire in 2009 and then started volunteering with the American Red Cross, primarily because my parents were both very active in the Red Cross when they were alive. And so I became a disaster services associate with the American Red Cross. I was nationally deployed 5 different times on hurricanes, floods, and tornadoes. Here in Central Oregon, as a mass care supervisor for 5 years, I mainly operated shelters during wildfire season. So there were at least 6 or 8 shelters, primarily Warm Springs. For some reason, as most of you know, Warm Springs tends to burn most summers. And when it burns, we do have to provide shelter for those folks. So sheltering in Warm Springs and also in Madras, and also the Canyon Creek Complex in John Day. And so I've had a lot of ancillary experience to wildfires. I became interested in Project Wildfire through Allison Green when I was one of the instructors and one of the authors of our disaster preparedness for the Red Cross. So I wrote a disaster preparedness for business. And Allison was quite interested in that. And I appreciate her introducing me a couple of years ago to the Project Wildfire Steering Committee. And then when Mountain High was very interested this last fall in becoming a FireWise community, I started attending the meetings again in December. So I'm very, very pleased to have been selected by the county commissioners to serve the entire county. I believe my vacancy is filling the citizen rep position. So I'm very pleased to do that and very excited to join the crew. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Nick Cannon?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Can.
Excellent. Good morning. I'm one of those people who has been attending the meetings for the past year almost, 9-10 months or so. So I'm pretty familiar with Project Wildfire, and I've been interested in what they do or what we do now. Also, I'm a Terrebonne citizen. I live at Smith Rock, which has been pleasantly quiet the past couple of weeks. It's like night and day. So as a Terrebonne resident and citizen, I'm a little concerned about our fire preparedness or lack thereof when I look at some of my neighbors. So I pursued Project Wildfire to get more acquainted with it and hopefully apply some of those learnings to my own community. I also work for ServPro here in Bend, so it aligns nicely with what I do. ServPro does disaster restoration for residents and business. And other than that, on the personal note, so I'm from Alaska originally, and I lived overseas for 15 years or so. I worked in international advertising and marketing. So hopefully I can apply some of my skills and experience to marketing and advertising and promoting Project Wildfire to the larger community. And that's it.
Great, thanks, Dick. Chief Kemena?
Good morning, everybody. I am Ken Kemna. I'm the fire chief with Redmond Fire and Rescue. I've been there, since November of 2018. I retired out of the Santa Clara County Fire Department in August of 2018, so I failed at retirement pretty quickly. My wife and I had been looking to move to Oregon for probably about 30 years. So when I finished up my career in Santa Clara County with 31 years, retiring as the fire chief there, it was a real natural transition for me. I wasn't ready to quit. Working in the fire service is something that I've been doing since I was in high school, and something I'm going to probably continue to do for some time. So it was a really natural fit and a good transition for the two of us to make the move up here to the Pacific Northwest. Obviously in California, I have a lot of experience working with wildfire. It's just pretty much a perpetual thing for those of us from California. The department that I served was in the San Francisco Bay Area, sort of the south end of San Francisco Bay Area. So we had about 150 square miles of the south end of the Santa Clara County, sort of the south and west side, which is really the Santa Cruz Mountain Range. So we had a very significant interface and intermix area that we served in the fire district. We were also very active in the wildfire preparedness, activities, not only locally, but we were a very large mutual aid provider of resources. I served for the last 10 years on the Fire Scope Board of Directors, where I assisted with the Office of Emergency Services in overseeing the state's mutual aid deployment system and emergency management system. Locally, we translated much of that into local knowledge. We also ran the communication center, oversaw the Office of Emergency Services for the county, and I served as the county fire marshal. So have pretty much spent my entire career dealing with wildfire, either locally or somewhere in the state of California. One of the things that I became very familiar with, or comfortable with, I should say, in California is the statewide mutual aid system and moving resources, large amounts of resources up and down the state of California, pretty much at a moment's notice. For the most part, California during fire season, which is all year long, is theoretically one big fire department. So whether you're having a big fire in Southern California, Northern California, or in Central California, it really doesn't matter. For the most part, we know each other, and we're sending resources to another agency or another community that we're familiar with. So looking to bring a lot of my experience in education here. I'm obviously very interested in continuing to help evolve our fire service here locally. I'm a big advocate of regional solutions to some of the larger problems that we face. None of us can solve these problems on our own, especially when we have such a diverse community. Central Oregon is very diverse. Obviously, we have some more densely populated areas, but we have some larger rural areas. And getting the word out and getting compliance when it comes to wildfire preparedness can be challenging. I had the good fortune of working on the Wildfire Mitigation Advisory Committee with several of you, which was very good. It was also very educational to kind of help me get a better lay of the land. Still consider myself kind of new here, but I'm enjoying participating and rolling up my sleeves and being part of the solution to what I see as a big concern. So I'm happy to be part of the group, and thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Ed. Nice to see you. So I'm a new assignee. I have not participated except for the last Zoom meeting, so thank you for welcoming me. I've been in emergency services for over 20 years. I started in structure fire and got into wildland fire, which then led me into emergency management. So I've been doing emergency management for about 12 years, mostly at the government level. I worked down in Josephine County for quite a while and out in Colorado, where I got lots of experience out in the Denver metro area, because if it's not your disaster, it's someone else's, and you get to go help them. So I learned a lot between those two. And then in the last 4 years, I've been in the private sector. So I represent business for the purpose of this group. But I've done a lot of training and education and public speaking and outreach on wildfire, Cascadia, natural disasters, public health. So I'm really looking forward to being a part of this group and engaging in the community. I've been in Oregon most of my life, and we've just recently, in the last year and a half, moved to Bend. So I've just been playing over on this side of the hill for the longest time, and we finally committed to moving over here. So we're glad to be here, and I look forward to meeting you all in person, hopefully soon.
Great, thank you. Oliver. Oh, you're still on mute.
There we go.
There you go.
How about that?
Perfect.
Better? I'm
Yep.
Oliver Tatum. I grew up in Central Oregon. I actually live on the same property where I grew up, but it's not the same house. We lost that house in the 1996 skeleton fire. So my interest in this committee is really personal, having experienced the loss of a home and wildfire, and I want to help my neighbors prevent that from happening again. I'm a paramedic and a nurse. I work for St. Charles Immediate Care and Summit BMC Urgent Care. So any given day, you'll find me in one of 5 different clinics. Yeah, moved back here about 5.5 years ago. In addition to working as a nurse, I also serve on the COCC Board of Directors representing South Deschutes County. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. And I didn't see Brandon, but Brandon Fogelman, are you on today? Just in case. Brandon's one other member. He was on our last meeting, but didn't look like he made it this time. So we'll get a chance to meet him at a upcoming meeting. So thanks, everybody. This is kind of an odd time altogether, but definitely a little bit different format for getting to meet the larger group. So thank you for providing those introductions. So with that, I think we're ready to turn it over to Alex to give us a little bit of overview of his tour of Australia.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so just forewarning, my wife and I are both working from home and fighting for bandwidth on separate meetings. So if something goes awry, we'll duke it out and try to get back on. So a little bit about, I guess I'll start with kind of some big picture stuff. So as you know, back in November, Australia started having what they would describe as an unprecedented wildfire season. What that looks like here in the United States and Canada is through an agreement that both countries have with Australia. We have the ability to exchange resources, and historically, the last probably 10 years, it's been more Australians and New Zealanders coming to help us, and like with us going to help Canada and Canadians coming to help us. So this was the first time in a while that that Australia exercised the other side of the agreement, which is bringing Canadians and Americans over to help them with their season. They recognized very early that their season started early, was more active than normal, and they were working on a 4-year drought cycle that had a lot of places with about a quarter of the amount of moisture that they would normally get for an extended period. So four more seasons of that dryness. So they knew that they were in for it. So they started ordering. One of the big things that's really different between Australia, Canada, and the United States is Australia doesn't have they don't have a national multi-agency coordinating system like we do in the United States. So here in the US and in Canada, all the provinces in Canada, all the states in the United States, we coordinate through what we call NMAC, National Multi-Agency Coordination. That's all the agencies coming together to prioritize, to share resources, to figure out what's most important and how to mobilize everyone's assets to get to those problems. Australia doesn't have a coordination system like that. They really, the states and territories operate independently amongst each other. So as Australia started getting some action, so Victoria, the state of Victoria, which is the southeast corner of the state or of the country, and then New South Wales, which is just right north of that, and West Australia started getting active in wildfire, which are the three, that's their normal 3 areas that have most of the veg and get most of the wildfire activity, similar to what we get. As they started getting active, those 3 states all started looking at making orders. So those orders come in independently from those states to Canada, to the United States. So Victoria made orders, New South Wales made orders, and West Australia made orders. And those are all independent of each other. And so what we saw was a difference between each one of those. Victoria ordered what they would call task force, what we would call crews. And so not a very typical resource configuration for them. They saw a need to have more what we would describe as crews, 20-person crews, ground pounders, not tied to an engine, but able to get off into the bush to engage a fire remotely. New South Wales didn't order crews. They ordered individual specialists, so planning section chiefs, aviation specialists, operations specialists. And then New South Wales or West Australia, their need was purely aviation. And so they ordered aviation specialists. So starting in November all the way through March, those orders were coming in to the United States, to Canada, and through the National MAC group, they disseminated those orders to the regions, to the different agencies, anybody that could fulfill the obligation of the agreement itself, which was a little bit different than how we do business here. The agreement says that only agency personnel can fill those orders. So we can't use local fire service cooperators. We can't use ADs like we normally would to staff our teams and our incidents here in the United States. So that was a little bit of a problem. And then the other problem was just having a valid passport. So folks needed to have a valid passport and able to be able to be mobilized. And we all know how long it takes if you don't have a valid passport to get that done. And depending on how much money you want to pay will depend on how fast you can make that happen. If you pay the extra money for the expedited, you can get it pretty quickly. So those orders started coming in. We started sending folks to both New South Wales and Victoria initially. Where my assignment came in, middle of January, we were looking at more orders. We were continuing to check availability of our folks to see who was available, who met the criteria to be able to go and fit into what the states in Australia were asking for, what kind of skill sets, what kind of qualifications, and then how those qualifications crosswalked from our system to their system, which is overall is pretty close to each other, not a lot of difference. And that's what kind of makes the whole thing work pretty good. So Victoria, middle of January, decided to order incident management teams. So first time that's ever happened. They decided they wanted 3 type 1 incident management teams to come from the United States or Canada to Australia to operate as an incident management team. So different than ordering specialists or crews, they wanted actual IMTs. They were very specific in the positions they wanted on those IMTs. They were 10-person IMTs that consisted of IC, operations, information, logistics, and some resource folks. No safety. They felt that they had safety covered on their end, but they needed those other skill sets. And so they made those orders. The incident management team that I'm one of the ICs for was actually ordered, but at 10 people, there's only a few slots. So I wasn't able to go with that team. So the National MAC group had asked me to go over as an agency rep. So what that means is I would go to Victoria and I would represent our resources that were currently assigned to the state of Victoria on incidents. That is kind of an unknown. We don't necessarily use that role here. We used to call it an IARR, or interagency crew rep. And when we send crews to, let's say we send hotshot crews out of the Northwest to the Southwest, we used to send an agency rep with them just to make sure that if somebody got hurt, somebody got sick, somebody had a family emergency, there was somebody there to take care of logistics and then support those folks to get them home. Now in the world of cell phones and being so connected, that role's kind of went away here within our system, because anybody can get a hold of anybody at any time. They can communicate, they can message and take care of logistics much simpler than prior to cell phones, where maybe a crew was stuck out at a fire camp somewhere and with no contact. So that role kind of went away here, but it was imperative and recognized early that role was going to need to be established for folks going overseas, just because the amount of time it takes to communicate, the time differences, and the ability to get somebody help is way different than it is if they're in the United States, obviously, on a 15-hour plane right away. So I went over as a rep. I went over with I flew over with 2 hotshot crews that we put together, one out of the Northwest and one out of the Southwest. And those were a mixture of folks from all the hotshot crews in the regions. So they weren't a true, everybody wearing the same t-shirt type of hotshot crew that we would normally have. They were a mixture of folks with that skill set, very heavy on falling skills, chainsaw skills, because that was needed, that was recognized and needed. And so we put those together, and I went over with them into what I would describe as really the middle of their fire season. Their peak month is February. That's their August to us. And so they were in the thick of it. They had a lot of fire, and I'll show you a progression map here. Boone's got it queued up, and we'll show you that here in a minute. Pretty interesting just from the state of Victoria, what they experienced. So my role was not only the 2 crews or task force that I went over with, but there was also 3 IMTs assigned. There was a whole bunch of miscellaneous aviation specialists that were spread out all over the state of Victoria on what were considered separate incidents, but because of the amount of fire behavior and fire growth that they saw, they actually were really ended up being all the same incident. They all grew together, and you'll see that in the progression map here shortly. But they had incident management teams that were spread all over, managing sections of that incident, and really the overall their overall strategy, which would be similar to ours, and I would really liken it to 2015 in Northeast Washington, where Okanagan County and Chelan County had so much fire that our traditional method of fighting fire, anchor, flank, perimeter control, really went out the window. And that was just because of scale. We were never going to have enough people to get around those fires. So we dealt with the emerging areas within those fires, threatening values at risk, threatening communities. We would mobilize resources to go deal with that. They were in the same boat. So as they used technology and they used aviation to see and understand where those threats were, they mobilized through their incident management teams resources to go deal with those problems and save values at risk. Very similar to what we would do. So they were in a really bad spot. They had seen tremendous fire growth, tremendous impact to communities, many fatalities. Their fatalities were really very similar to the fatalities that we would see. They had tree strikes, so snag issues. They had vehicle accidents, and they had aviation operations. The day that we were leaving for Australia was the day that the Coulson C-130 went down and killed all 3 pilots. So we went into the situation, and the resources that I went over went into situations where there had been fatalities on the fires that we were assigned to, and the camps that we were assigned to, and then the recent tragedy of the heavy air tanker was kind of looming over the whole fire ground. And so lots and lots of discussion about risk, and lots of discussion about where we should be putting people. Very similar to what we do here every time that we get a fire. So a lot of that was happening. A lot of really high level conversations about how to take care of our responders. They were obviously very tired. They were taxed. They'd been going for a long time, and they really needed some support and some help from our folks. And so that was the number one key to our mission was do what we can to help them. It wasn't about us coming over to teach them how to do anything. It wasn't about us coming over to show them anything or tell them to do it differently. It was about us being of service to them, to their communities, to their responders when they were in a time of need. Very similar to how when we bring Australians and New Zealanders over, it's the same thing. It's in support for us. They've always done whatever we've asked them to do. And so it was our opportunity to go over and return the favor that we've, at least in my career, I've so often been the benefactor of those folks coming to help. So that was our mission. A lot of similarities in politics, a lot of similarities in agency. So they have parks, they have federal agencies, which because of the separation of the states, really act more like a state agency. They have Victoria has what they call CFA, Country Fire Authority, which is very similar if you're familiar with CAL FIRE. They do both structure and wildland across the state of Victoria. So literally hundreds of fire stations for CFA. They have an organization called DELP, Department of Environment, Water, Lands, and Protection. And that's kind of more like a federal agency. And then they have, DELP is a federal agency, and it's a land management agency. CFA, Country Fire Authority, is a response agency. And then you have Parks Victoria, which was really more like our Park Service, but at the state level. And so you have three agencies that are all having to work together, very similar to what we deal with. A little bit different missions, a little bit different how they look at fire. But overall, they do come together similar to how we do, to organize, to have a single mission, single objectives for an incident, even though it's touching multiple ownerships. And we tried to just build in with them and support them. It was probably very similar to them coming over and trying to understand how we, any local area, how we organize and how we work together with our partners. It was challenging for our folks to understand who we were working for, who was in charge, and how we fit into that. Overall, it ended up working out just fine, and we were able to figure it out. But very similar politics of what we experience here. Strategy and tactics, like I said, they were in a response mode, triage mode most of the time, up until mid-February. Then the opposite happened. They started receiving rain, unprecedented amounts of rain. So they went from extreme fire behavior, burning homes, burning communities, to trying to keep roads open, trying to keep communities accessible by road, as flooding, road, culvert breakage, all of those things started happening because of the amount of rain and nothing to keep vegetation on the hill. So everything ran off, clogged rivers, clogged culverts, clogged bridges, all of that kind of stuff that we'd experience with large amounts of rainfall. So it was kind of a point where their mission changed, their objectives changed from fighting fire, protecting communities, to now just keeping communities accessible for logistics and support. And our crews and our resources made that transition with them into road opening, chainsaw work, snagging access and egress routes for those communities. And they worked through that. Brenda Hallmark, who is also on this call, she went over a little bit after me, and she was actually ordered to New South Wales, the state to our north, as a planning section chief. So like I said, they had ordered specialists, not teams, and they took those folks and integrated them into their organizations throughout New South Wales, spread them out depending on where the need was. So probably a completely different experience, and of how that worked in New South Wales versus Victoria. It's really interesting to know that even though they're both, those two states are both part of Australia, they were the kind of the two big players in this whole wildfire event. But it's really there could be a pretty big wall in between those two states. They really don't work hand in hand very well. We experienced that with trying to move some of our American and Canadian resources from New South Wales to Victoria, or vice versa if there was a need. But because they were on separate orders, how those states got the resources there, it became very difficult to just pop somebody over the line there to work in the other state, where normally here in the United States that'd be very simple. That'd be a click of a mouse. There it was much different, much more difficult to cross those agency boundaries or those state boundaries, which was a little bit unfortunate, and hopefully there's some lessons learned there. Why don't we, Boone, why don't you show the progression video? And this is just up till mid-January. So you'll see the beginning of their fire season in late November, and the fire growth and some of the bad days that they had. The 31st was their bad day for sure. So through the 21st of January, Boone, if you can just leave that up. So if you look all the way over to the far right of the screen, down low there, in that orange or yellow color is a place called Malakuta. If you saw the news, that's the location that it's a little beach community, very touristy for Australians, not necessarily an international destination, but a lot of Australians go there. It's right on the Tasmanian Sea, very beautiful place. That's where they had thousands of folks that were rescued off the beach by the Navy. As that fire made that run into Malakuta, basically it took out most of the town, most of the homes within the town, spared the very center of town, the little downtown area, but everything surrounding it, and it stranded over 1,000 people on the beach. The Navy ended up coming in by boat to get those folks off the beach and get them back to Melbourne to safety. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, the Navy ended up flying folks back into Malakuta to retrieve their vehicles and what was left. But a place that very sad, looked like a war zone, and I've never seen fire behavior that just absolutely ran into a coast, a beach, a water body like that, right up to the sand. So you can obviously see the footprint there, how everything grew together. There was incident management teams spread throughout that area to manage parts of that. You can see where that state line between New South Wales and Victoria, where they had fires across both sides of it. Once a fire crosses that line, it becomes the other state's problem. They don't, like I said, they don't necessarily work together real well. And so as they send fire across the border, they no longer worry about it. Near the end of this whole thing, because they were sharing so much fire, they were liaisoning between the two states a little bit better, just to coordinate efforts a little bit more. They typical things that you would have on a border, like aircraft issues, intrusions, airspace issues, all of that was happening. So they saw that they needed a liaison between the two states and coordinate that to ensure that they didn't have any accidents. And then just sharing of resources across the state, that started happening a little bit better. I will pause there and see if Brenda has anything that she would like to add, and then we can open it up for questions, Ed.
Yeah, I think, like Alex said, I was in New South Wales, so those fires that you see on that image there that crossed over up into New South Wales, that's where I was. I was in the far south coast, which is the far southeast corner of Australia before it turns and goes to the south. Alex covered a lot of it, and it's very true. There wasn't a lot of good coordination and communication between the states, but the partnerships within the state were very strong. They worked very well together. I was working with what they called the Rural Fire Service, which in my mind is the equivalent of like Oregon Department of Forestry, state-run agency, except the Rural Fire Service just deals with fire. They have, for the entire state of New South Wales, they have 900 paid employees. The rest of their workforce is volunteers, and I believe they have upwards of 40,000 volunteers that come out and help support firefighting when they're called. One thing that I thought was really interesting while I was there, the ex-prime minister for Australia showed up as a volunteer firefighter, and we deployed him out on the ground, and he was out there putting out fire, digging in the dirt, which I guess here would be the equivalent of Barack Obama showing up and going out and fighting fire with us side by side with our firefighters. So it was pretty impressive. They look at it as more as a community thing, and so the volunteers come from wherever they have regular jobs, and so, I didn't get there until I landed February 9th, which was about when the big rainstorm hit. So fire activity had calmed down quite a bit. And so a lot of us thought we were just going to go home, but because of the season that they had and the taxing nature of the work they were doing for so long, they just couldn't find people that were able to come and still support the efforts. They had to get back to their regular jobs. They had to go repair their houses, that kind of stuff. So in the area that I was at, which was called the far south coast area, I think they had the equivalent in that area alone. There was, let's see, over 1 million acres burned just in that area. They had, let's see, it was just over 1.5 million acres burned in that area, which equated to about 60 to 80% of their landmass. They lost around 1,000 homes. There were over 400 homes destroyed, and just in that area alone, they had 8 people lost their lives during the bushfires. One other thing that I saw that was huge there was they had the icon system. It's a database where it's like one-stop shopping, where they put all of their information that is then they're giving live updates every day as things are progressing and emergencies are happening. They're feeding that information straight in no matter where they are, and that's feeding straight up to the state EOC, so that information is getting transferred real time. We don't have that here, and I think it would be amazing if we had a system like that. We do situation reports, and we're putting those in. We're doing them once, sometimes twice a day for the fires, depending on the situation, but we don't have a mechanism where we can be feeding real-time updates if there's an emergency happening, if there's somebody that gets hurt, where we can be feeding that information upwards so that everybody has that same clear picture real time as it's happening. So that was a huge tool that they had that would be amazing if we had here. But like Alex said, their IMT organization structure was very similar to what we have here. Some of the roles do things a little bit differently. It was a big eye-opener for me when I went as a plan section chief. There in Australia, they use their planning section chiefs more as we would call our planning ops. So we have a function in our operations group that coordinates the resources, looks where the needs are for the next day, and they're deciding where the priorities are and where those resources are going out on the fire line. Whereas our planning's chief is, we're facilitating the meetings, we're producing the products that are going out to the firefighters. So there's not really a big operational component to our plan section chief. So going down there, day one, kind of transitioning with the person I was replacing, it was a big eye opener to me that I was going to be filling that role. Fortunately, I have an operational background, so it wasn't terrible, and the fire behavior at that point when we got there wasn't so crazy that I felt I could handle it. So, but that was a big eye opener, just kind of figuring out they have the same structure and the same positions, but they use them a little bit differently. So, figuring out what those differences were, how I could relate it to the organizations at home, and then adapting and like Alex said, just getting them the help that they needed and making things work. So beyond that, I think, things were pretty similar. Like Alex said, it wasn't a huge adaptation, once you figured out how they operated and that it was because I was there after the widespread rains, it was not as crazy as some of the folks and just stressful with the impacts that they were getting from the fires that for the folks that went over a little bit earlier in the year. So it allowed me time to adapt have a little more time to get my feet on the ground and figure things out and be able to be helpful to them. So I think that's about all I have, Alex. You covered a lot of it. So
thanks, Brenda. And I just wanted, I failed to mention what Brenda mentioned with the volunteerism. It's an incredible community-based effort when with that volunteer network, and so Victoria has the same type of volunteerism throughout their area. And they say 60,000 is how many volunteers they have. It's unbelievable to think that they amass that many folks through a volunteer system to help out with that effort. And you see that not only with fire, but just the way that that society functions is very community-based, very just a amazing amount of volunteerism and friendliness and willingness to help out a neighbor, help out anybody. The one thing just from the society that I remember the most is you never walked by somebody without them greeting you. It didn't matter where you were, what uniform you were wearing. It was just constant. Every time you walked into a gas station, somebody greeted you. Whether you walked by somebody or the station attendant or whatever. And when I got back, and first time I walked into Fred Meyer's and walked by a guy who had his head down and didn't make eye contact, it was kind of shocking almost, because I'd been so conditioned over a 30-day period to just greet everybody and be friendly to everybody. And so that the thing that I take back the most from just the Australia experience is just the friendliness and the how that community just accepts everybody, and doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And as soon as they find out you're an American, they're even more excited to talk with you and share their country and share everything that they have there. So I'll pause there, Ed, and certainly welcome any questions or clarification or anything that anybody has.
Thanks, Alex and Brenda, both for sharing that. Was a huge event over our winter and their summer, and so that's a good recap of experience. So I just invite questions. It looks like Bob's got his hand raised, so we'll go to hands. You can also, I would just remind people, if you want to pop a question in the chat instead, you can do that as well. But Bob?
Alex, excuse me, I've got a couple of questions. What types of fuels were predominant? Are their fuels similar to ours, or are they totally different fuels with, say, a lot more combustible material?
So yeah, way different. And that was a steep learning curve for our folks, both from a fire behavior perspective, understanding what those critical thresholds are in fire behavior. So fuels, dryness, wind, temperature, RH, all those things. It's a eucalypt, so it's a hardwood forest. It's extremely resilient, amazingly resilient. As we saw fire move through areas that as part of those large runs, as I drove through those 3 weeks, 4 weeks after those fire runs, the eucalypt were already sprouting and starting their recovery process, their restoration process to grow. So a crown fire doesn't kill the species. There's very few snags. It's very oily, and when it's dry and when it's windy, there's really nothing that anybody's going to do to stop. And you saw those fire runs. A lot of those happened at nighttime. So it's a fuel type when their conditions align. So drought over time, peak summer season, so high temperatures, low RH, lack of moisture, all those things like what we would experience in our Northwest fire season of August. Those bad days, that fuel type is incredibly available, and it's continuous. And so the eucalypt forests are extremely continuous, and then as that gets down lower in elevation, it breaks up. That's where the communities are, open areas. The thing about their fuel type that is unprecedented to us and really still hard to fathom for us is spotting distances. So they have species, those eucalypt species, a lot of them have very large chunks of bark, and those chunks of bark will come off during the fire, and they've had spotting up to almost 40 kilometers. So extreme spotting distances. And so it can their fires can move over areas that there's no fuels for literally miles. And those firebrands will land and start new fires in different areas. And so it's often hard for them to understand if a new fire is actually a new fire from a new start, or if it's just spotting from another fire, because those distances and the scale is so big. That was the biggest things for us. Our sawyers, falling hardwoods is extremely different than the type of falling with fir trees and pine trees and stuff that most of our folks experience here. They break up easy. They're usually hollow, dead in the center, and they're really, really big trees. And so there was a lot of danger, a lot of skill. And what we found is we sent our best sawyers and chainsawers over there. It took them a couple days to understand what they were doing, and the Australians recognized that we had folks that were highly skilled in chainsaws and falling. They just were unfamiliar with the species and the technique. So we got our folks up to speed, and then they chainsaw operations for them, and lots and lots of production. We do anticipate, because the crew thing worked out so well for them, we do anticipate future orders when they get in their fire season to get our crew kind of configurations, our hotshot crews. That was a tremendous resource for them, and I think they recognize that, and will probably want that in the future.
Another question, do they have anything in their country like our FireWise program, where the homeowners take a lot of responsibility to cleaning up their property?
Yeah, in Victoria, they certainly do. It's not nearly as robust as this organization or some of the other like organizations around the country. They have had, really their fire problem is very short term. 2009 was Black Friday, Black Saturday. That was the day they lost 175 folks in a community that was burned over. So since then, the country itself has made a lot of changes in how they're organized. The states have made changes in how they're organized and how they cooperate. They've put systems in place to cooperate better, but it's pretty young. You think about, that's a pretty short time frame to make some monumental bureaucracy changes in how they do business to protect those communities. They do a lot of what they call planned burning. That's our prescribed fire. They use the terminology planned burning. They have the exact same problems that we have with smoke, and a lot of the communities aren't favorable of putting smoke in the air with their prescribed fire program, just like ours aren't. And so they're trying to increase that. They're also declining logging. And they're setting aside more tracts of land that will no longer be logged, and so there's political controversy there, very similar to what we went through in the Northwest with the spotted owl and our decline in using natural resources across agencies. So they're in the same boat. So very, very similar politics and very similar challenges for their leaders.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Alex, I have one other question, and then I think we'll wrap up and move on for a few minutes for just general updates. But Ray Meow asked what Australians do that we might think of doing, especially in regards to any kind of communication, real-time information, and then any clues of how they got that level of volunteerism that they got there.
So the first question, the technology, Brenda kind of covered it. They have systems that I think our folks drooled over. They were so informative. They were so real time. They were so easy to access. Real-time updates. In Victoria, they used, they would launch helicopters with infrared during the day, and they would go out and they would video and pinpoint fire edge and upload that while in the air to their system that they called FireWeb. And so an ops chief, an incident commander, a fire manager could just be watching their screen and see where those problem areas of the fire were and how they were progressing and what they were doing. It was so relevant and so immediately recognized by our folks that the Forest Service actually sent our assistant director, our national assistant director, Rhonda Toronto, over to just see it. And so that's under her scope of her job, is that national level IT and technology. And so we wanted to see it, we wanted to experience it, we wanted to learn from it and see what we can bring back here to be able to mimic that somehow for our folks and for our systems, to where all of us can see the same thing at the same time with technology and use of technology. They have a UAS program, so drones. They have all of that stuff, and it's incredible. And it was certainly the one thing that I wish I could bring back to help us. It would be a really kind of a game changer for us to be able to have that level of common operating picture all the time. And Ed, I forgot what the second part of the question of.
The second part was just any clues as to how they get so many volunteers.
You know, that I would say that's just how their society really is wired. It's an effort by all. That friendliness, that you hear the term "no worries." That's really just how people are, and it's never a bad day. And so that friendliness and that willingness to help a neighbor, that I saw that in everything that I did and everywhere I went, that people were just genuinely nice and willing to do anything. And so I think it just comes as kind of the natural part of their society, and being an Australian, is that you're going to give back, you're going to help others. And where you choose to do that may be a volunteer as a firefighter, or it may be some other avenue to volunteer. But it's just it's incredible how much of that happens. And you saw that the folks that weren't necessarily a volunteer for the firefighter, once all these communities and these people were affected, then that volunteerism took a whole nother level of people helping out their neighbors and helping out their own that were impacted by the fires. And similar to what we would see here, but it's almost more automatic there, that's going to happen. It's not an ask. It's people coming saying, I want to help. How can I help? And we saw that with the incident management teams. Kind of the same thing that we've experienced here, is so many people wanting to come help and wanting to give stuff to us that we can't necessarily use. And so trying to funnel people's efforts into the right place to get the stuff to where it actually really needs to go, versus maybe where somebody thinks it needs to go, if that makes any sense.
Great. Well, Alex and Brenda, both, thank you. I know there's lots of stuff going on in getting ready for fire seasons, but I do appreciate you taking a little bit of time to talk about your experience in Australia. So thank you. With that, we do have a few minutes left. I don't know that I want to try to go down the entire list and assume that everybody has updates, but I'm sure that some of you do. We've had a lot go on in the last month, and things upcoming. So I would encourage any folks that have an update for the good of the group, just information sharing here in the last 15 minutes or so. Probably be more organized to either raise a hand or put in a chat. It looks like Nathan was the first there. So I'm going to hand it over to Nathan, then we'll just go down the row of either hands up or chats. Nathan? Maybe we'll go to David first then and circle back to Nathan.
Okay, good morning. David with the Red Cross. Just one thing to report. We've been having a lot of internal discussions how we're going to move forward into fire season with setting up shelters in a COVID environment. And I think all the county emergency managers and public health officials in Oregon received an email yesterday from the Red Cross regional office, and we'll be following that up with local calls just to coordinate on how we can set up shelters. And one thing the Red Cross is already doing, in the past, we've kind of put people up in motels until we exceeded about 25 individuals, and then we would set up a more of a mass shelter. And we've already changed that policy to bump it up to 50. So we're going to try to find commercial lodging for up to 50 people before we open up a more of a mass shelter. And then when we get to that mass shelter situation, working closely with the county officials on how we can screen folks and set it up in a safe manner that meets social distancing guidelines. So county officials can expect a follow-up call from the Red Cross in the near future to get plans in place for this summer. That's it.
Thanks, David. Nathan.
Hey, sorry about that. I didn't unmute myself. Thanks for your patience. Sorry I'm not on video. Actually, you're probably welcome I'm not on video. Yeah, I just want to follow up, David. Thank you for mentioning that. That was one of the things I was going to bring up. We actually have a meeting in about an hour and a half with local Red Cross talking about some local COVID-19 evacuation and sheltering planning. We're going to take it, and I think our thoughts are aligned very closely with what the Red Cross put out yesterday. We've been having this discussion within our incident management team for the last about 2 weeks. We're kind of applying a PACE model to it. So obviously, kind of multiple strategies based on available resources as well as the conditions at hand. And so obviously non-congregate sheltering is preferred. When we move to a point where that's not realistic, then looking at non-congregate sheltering for high-risk populations versus maybe other more congregate sheltering options for lower risk, as well as the screening methodology that David mentioned. We also had a kind of a real brief conversation with Joe Stutler a couple weeks ago, talking about transfer of risk as far as what that means for fire folks as far as risks that they'll take to protect communities that maybe aren't able to evacuate in light of this, or unwilling to evacuate and go to a shelter. So sure, we'll continue to have those conversations. So look forward to our meeting today, see what comes out of that. I'll just give you a quick update as far as the Sheriff's Office and the Deschutes County Incident Management Team that's been managing COVID. We're into week 7, fully activated. We have over 60 folks, about 65 people assigned. We are working nearly virtually. So the incident commanders, I'm one of 2, and logistics are really the only ones working at the EOC. The rest, planning and most operations section, as well as most of our liaisons, are working virtually. Obviously, that presents a lot of complexities and complications to incident management, as well as just relationship building and the efficiency of our actions. But I think we're working through it, and we're obviously thankful for use of technology to be able to make that done. Probably our biggest issues right now is still supply chain issues. This was kind of a disaster within a disaster within a disaster. And so the supply chain seems to be improving a little bit. We're struggling with the PPE issue, mainly because the market has been flooded by either price gouging or really questionable quality PPE. And that's posing a challenge, sorting through all those, vetting them, trying to determine what's actually good and what's garbage. We've seen 5 to 6 time increase in price. So for example, isolation gowns, which are in high demand, are typically, before this, matter of fact, in January, made a purchase of isolation gowns. They were 71 cents a gown. They're now going for $9 to $10 a gown. So that's, it's not sustainable. So working through those, doing a lot of outside the box thinking, buying reusable gowns that can be deconned, more of like the chemical protective type PPE, a lot of reusable like P100 type masks, which offer the filtration, but are really designed for an industrial application. So a lot of challenges around that. And then obviously just the breadth of impacts that this has had to our communities is creating obviously a lot of not only really complicated issues, but it's also aggravating existing issues that, you know, we're commonly dealing with, such as homelessness and poverty and all that. So we're trying to help coordinate some messaging and some planning around still continue to support those populations, but with a public health lens. And, you know, I think probably the biggest thing is just from a communication standpoint, it's just an unseen threat. You know, people see fire, they see smoke in the air, and you know, people can wrap their head around it, but this is really different, and people have very differing experiences. So we're seeing issues with what we see here in Central Oregon may not be as vivid as what you're seeing in other parts of the country. I spoke with a friend whose sister is a pediatric oncologist at Yale, and you know, describing a scene where they're laying people on gym floors. Half of them are going to just get better because they will, and the other half are getting palliative care and you know, are not going to make it. And so it's just, you know, it's just a different experience that everybody's seeing. So people are basing their reactions based on those observations, and so that creates obviously some challenges. That's really my COVID-19 update from the county perspective. You know, I think we're working right now on reopening strategies with the state and trying to figure out what that's going to look like. But I would anticipate that we're going to still be mostly closed for several more weeks would be my guess. You know, see what that graded reopening strategy looks like. But so that's kind of the update on that. And I just wanted to highlight, we did do our first search and rescue virtual academy this year. It was a little different, talking into an iPad when you're teaching classes, but it seemed to be okay. And we're just working through once we can relax some social distancing issues, we'll do a lot of the physical training that's required for people to graduate the academy, probably sometime this summer. But just a lot of challenges, but thankful for the use of technology that allows us to actually still get work done in spite of it. So that's all I had.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Looked like Alex Robertson had some items to share.
So I'll just give you a few of the highlights. So as you can imagine, our preparations for 2020 fire season have been quite challenging with COVID-19, of trying to understand how we're going to continue to be able to do mission critical work like wildfire response and provide for the safety and care of our responders and their families. So the amount of Teams meetings and Zoom meetings that are happening right now trying to sort this out are at an all-time high pace. And I'll just leave it at that. A couple of the things that you'll see a little bit different from us this year is we're really taking a strategy of isolating our modules, and that's in conflict with everything that we've been teaching our folks for the last 10 years as we talk about teamwork and crew cohesion and common operating picture. All of that was accomplished through getting our folks together, getting them to communicate, and getting them to make sure that they understand clear leaders' intent, what their mission is, how their mission is going to meet objectives of protecting values at risk. Because of COVID-19, we're taking a stance of keeping people separated, keeping like modules separated from other modules, and trying to limit the amount of interaction our folks have with the transient nature of our workforce, which is contractors coming in, resources from outside the area, and understanding that the challenges of that are going to be that folks coming in from maybe some of those areas that are impacted more by COVID-19 than maybe our local areas, as Nathan described. So how we do that, we're still, it's going to be a lot of game time decision making for us. We've exercised it a little bit. We had a 5-acre fire this weekend up on the Maoris, where we sent 5 engines, but only 11 people. So spreading people out in vehicles, we're assuming a little bit more risk with more drive time for more folks, a little bit more exposure there. And somewhere along the way, we're going to sort that out to figure out what that sweet spot is of separation and distancing versus one of the more dangerous things we do, which is driving. And so we're working through that. Then the other highlight, I guess, would just be prevention and closures. So Deschutes County fire departments have already closed for open burning. We have been in discussion with the fire chiefs, the Central Oregon Fire Chiefs Association and the ODF, along with our regional leadership on what closures, potential public use restrictions, prevention messaging, prevention campaign, all of those things, what that looks like amidst COVID-19 to do what we can to reduce the amount of human caused fires. One of the things that we've already experienced and already seen is as we've closed our traditional campgrounds because of the stay-at-home order, we've seen a tremendous amount of use in dispersed camping. So people are still going to the woods. It's still legal for them to go to the woods, and it's still legal for them to camp wherever they want. But what that's resulted in is more dispersed campfires, ground that's not hardened like a campground, not using our traditional fire rings in campgrounds. Folks still believing that we're in conditions that they can walk away from a campfire. And we're seeing those campfires spread. Like I said, we had a 5-acre fire that was a result of that this weekend. We're seeing it in more locations. So you'll probably start seeing some more aggressive prevention messaging from us, working with our PAOs who work with the JIC and work with our partners to build that campaign. We do have, because of COVID-19, we do have kind of some unprecedented restrictions with how much interaction we can do with the media locally. A lot of the media campaign is coming from the national office and our regional offices, and they've put some binders on our public information officers on what they can do. So we're trying to work through that to figure out how we solve our problem locally and stay within the good grace of our higher levels of organizational leadership. So we've got a couple meetings this week there where we're going to try to sort that out, but you would expect to probably see us move into public use restrictions like some other forests have already done south of us in Nevada and the Southwest. As they've dried out, they've seen an uptick in human caused fires, so they've moved into those public use restrictions early. I would imagine because of this fire season and the prediction for the Northwest to be above average, that you'll probably see something like that from us in the near future as we try to protect our responders from having to be exposed through human caused fires. And I'll end there, and we're just going to continue to plan and keep moving forward.
Great, thanks, Alex. Recognizing that we're running towards the end of our time together, if you do have to jump off, thanks for coming, but I would still open it up for any other updates, in particular if there's fire departments or ODF that want to share any particular updates for the good of the order before we close up our meeting today. And then I would also recognize, thanks Georgia for putting in that really detailed description of your spring project that was funded through the discretionary grant program. I've got a few of those updates coming in and I'm compiling those. So thanks for all of you that are still continuing on with your preparations for fire season and fuel reduction projects as well. Anyone else want to share an update? Gordon.
Yeah, so this is Gordon Foster with the Oregon Department of Forestry. Sorry, my video is not working either. So just some quick highlights. So we've actually had 3 incident management teams deploy with the statewide emergency operations center in Salem over the past month. And then we're just preparing for fire season, not unlike the Forest Service and the BLM. So what that looks like for us, is going to be different for sure. But we're planning on full staffing for the fire season and continuing operations as normal as we can. So leave it at that. Quick update. Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. Okay, I don't see anybody else chiming in with an update, and we are just right at our time here today. So I would just thank those of you that are left. Most everybody's still here. Thank you for your time this morning. You know, this isn't quite as great as a face-to-face meeting, but we're making it work, getting some good information out there still. So thank you all for your participation. I imagine we'll still be doing this again next month. So if you have any feedback for us and on how to make this more useful or effective for you, send us an email or give us a call, either Boone or I, and we'll be thinking about our next meeting next month. We will be meeting, and I anticipate it'll be right back here again. So with that, I think we'll be signing off, and thanks everybody for your time, and stay healthy, everybody.